Again, thank you for joining us tonight for the Safe Sport question and answer. Um, as most of you are aware, Athletics Nova Scotia released a safe sport policy about 3 weeks ago. In tonight's question and answer, we'll go through a bit of an overview of what the safe sport policy is, what the items that are being implemented, and then at the end, afterwards, we'll take any questions you may have and do our best to answer them. The safe sport movement is a bit of an evolving piece, both provincially and nationally, and because of this, we'll definitely be evolving along with the times. And so our safe sport policy, in the coming years will may change to kind of reflect the best practices and kind of requirements that we may have from whether it be from a provincial standpoint, national standpoint, or what have you. We'll start with a bit of a timeline. This is by no means meant to be all-inclusive timeline, but just a bit of provide a little bit of a background in terms of how the safe sport topic has kind of started in Canada and how it became a big item, a big agenda item on many people's, many organizations' plates. So, it was recognized that safe sport's an area that required more due diligence from all organizations, to create a safe sporting environment. And that safe sporting environment's not just athletes, that's everybody involved in sports. So athletes, coaches, officials, administrators, and anyone else, volunteers, anyone else who may be involved. As this group, most of you are probably aware, there's been many, kind of tragic situations within our country, and in particularly within our sport in the last decade that kind of highlighted the need for better governance in this area. And with this and other items in mind, the federal government launched a Safe Sport Working Group with the goal of creating a safer environment for all. So, that was back in April 2018. And then, from there were a number of regional stakeholder meetings held throughout the country. Anitra and I attended one in Halifax. I don't remember the exact date, but I think it was in late 2018, I believe it was. From there was funding provided to the Coaching Association of Canada to help them produce a safe sport training module. And the two big pieces so far, this is an ongoing process as well, but the two big pieces so far that two outcomes that came from this is one, there was a Canadian sport helpline that was launched in March 2019, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on. And the second big thing is the NCCP Safe Sport Training was launched on April 1st of this year, so just over a month ago. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well in some of our other slides. So in addition to the Safe Sport Training being launched on April 1st, it also became mandatory for all national sport organizations, so in our case, Athletics Canada, to provide safe sport training. And in particular, I think the idea was to provide the training through the NCCP module that was created. And then kind of finally, like I said, noted 3 weeks ago, we had launched our safe sport policy. So like, as I had mentioned, this is certainly not an all-inclusive timeline, but gives you a little bit of an idea of, when safe sports started to become a big topic within Canada, and some of the items that ultimately kind of led us to developing a safe sport policy. And I guess the other note there is that, both within our sport and other sports, a lot of organizations are just kind of starting their own kind of safe sport policies now. So I'm not going to say we're on the leading edge of the curve, but we're definitely on that front half. So we're trying to be as proactive as we can with this. And as I noted earlier, as best practices and requirements may change, then we'll evolve along with that. So our Safe Sport policy, the Athletics Nova Scotia Safe Sport policy, as mentioned, launched in April 2020. In the policy, it notes that there's a 6-week timeline to meet kind of the requirements within the policy, and in this case, given the unusual circumstance we're in with the COVID pandemic, that 6-week timeline wouldn't actually start until we resume whatever the new normal is, kind of moving forward. So that date is kind of to be determined. The policy, as well as other safe sport information, is available on the Athletics Nova Scotia website, and you can access it through the programs menu. So there'll be a safe sport tab there that would direct you both to our policy, code of conduct, as well as other safe sport resources. And I also noted earlier that it's applicable to everybody. So it's not just a coach, a policy. It's for coaches, officials, administrators, everybody. I would see moving forward, in an ideal world, there is talk about having training and resources available to be geared towards parents as well. So that's kind of the big group that is missing from the list of coaches, officials, and administrators. But that'll be something that I think we will see coming a little bit later down the road. So our policy sort of has 4 pillars. So there's I'll go into these in more detail, but the 4 of them being screening and background checks. Second part being training, policies and procedures, and then lastly, reporting. So I'll talk more about each of these 4 pillars. And then the other really noteworthy item, there's no cost to this. So there's no coach or official that's expected to bear any cost to completing any of these items. So when there are costs incurred, then they will be reimbursed by Athletics Nova Scotia. So the first pillar is screening. So there's 2 pieces within this. So the first being that there is a requirement for a vulnerable sector check on a 3-year renewal period. So what that would mean is if you got a vulnerable sector check done on June 1st, 2020, then it would be good until June 1st, 2023, at which case it would expire, and then you would be required to get a new check. So the vulnerable sector check is essentially an enhanced criminal record check. So if anybody has, or for coaches or anyone else who has gotten record checks for the purpose of volunteering in sport, if you went to a police station, they probably got you to do the vulnerable sector check as opposed to just a standard criminal record check anyway. So there are a number of people that would already have this piece done, whether it be for a provincial team, your own club that you're with, another sport that you may be associated with. In order to get this check done, there's a few different ways. So depending on where you live, you would visit your local RCMP or police station, and they would most definitely be able to take care of you. And or it can be done online as well on mybackcheck.com, and I believe that is only for the Halifax metropolitan area, I believe, or that's how it used to be. But I'm not 100% sure on that, to be honest. And as mentioned, any costs associated with this would be reimbursed if you incur any costs. The second piece of the screening process of the policy is a child abuse registry check. This is also on a 3-year renewal period, along the same lines as I mentioned earlier. This request is a little bit different in terms of receiving your child abuse check. It must be mailed in. So there is with proof of identity. So that could be driver's license, birth certificate, passport, any kind of the standard identity pieces. And there is a link within our Safe Sport policy that directs you to the child abuse registry check. And it's a pretty straightforward form. It's a fillable PDF, so you can fill it out on your computer, and then you just would have to print it and mail it to the address on the form along with your proof of identity. So those are the 2 items within the screening and background check pillar. The next pillar is the training piece. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a brand new NCCP Safe Sport training module that was just released on April 1st by the Coaching Association of Canada. It's a really great module. So there are other modules out there, and before we released our Safe Sport policy and before this module came out, we actually had some of the other modules in our policy. And then when this module was released on April 1st, exactly along the timelines that we were looking to release our policy, it was a much better fit for what we were trying to do for a few reasons. One, it's a free module. Second, it's a little bit shorter than some of the other available modules. And thirdly, it's a national governing body that's producing this module. So if you're a coach or official or volunteer that's involved in a number of other sports, it is relatively likely that this module will be a piece of their Safe Sport policy as well. So to avoid duplication, then this in some cases, this training may cross multiple sports. It's accessed through the locker. So those of you who are not familiar with the locker, it's actually the national database where all coach training and certification is tracked. You do not have to be a coach to access the locker. If you currently don't have access to the locker, how you would access the training, you would go to the locker website, and there's a button that says create account or something along those lines, and you can set up your account. You would get a login information for the locker, and that's where you would go to access your Safe Sport training module. Both myself and Anitra have taken this training, and as I mentioned to start off, it is very good. And I've spoke to a number of other colleagues in other sports as well, and everybody was kind of on the same page that it is a really great module, and quite interactive, and kind of keeps your attention as well, and validates learning, validates what they were trying to portray as well. So it is an excellent training module. The third pillar is our policies and procedures. So we have updated the Athletics Nova Scotia Code and Conduct. Now, this is also linked to a few places, I guess, on our website, but within the Safe Sport page, and it would also be under policies on our website as well. And then the other big piece is we have signed the Responsible Coaching Movement. And what that is, it's a national Safe Sport coaching movement through the Coaching Association of Canada, and with the goal essentially of creating a safe, positive environment for everybody who's involved in sport. And the three main focus areas off the responsible coaching movement are background screening, which we already talked about, rule of two, which I have a couple of slides coming up next on the rule of two, and then ethics training. So while this policy, currently Safe Sport policy doesn't have an ethics training component at the moment, it is something that moving forward in the coming years, that will be something that will likely be added to part of our policy in a bit of a phased approach, which I'll also say a few words to later on. So with regards to policies and procedures, the big difference in terms of items that coaches in particular and officials and other volunteers that need to really keep in mind is this rule of two. And I'm just going to briefly talk about what the rule of two is, but there will, at a later date, there will be a webinar that is solely dedicated to the rule of two and what it is and some of the more fine details or scenario-based situations potentially. And there will be somebody, we'll have somebody facilitate that session where that is kind of their expertise. But a brief overview. So this chart gives you a sort of a picture view in terms of what the purpose of the rule of two is. And ultimately, number one priority is to stop the one-to-one coach-athlete interaction. And that's, as you can see that on the left-hand side of your screen, and then a number of different steps all along the way that up to the kind of what they call the gold standard on the far right with two certified and trained coaches at any point in time where you may be interacting with one athlete. So at the absolute minimum, as you can see, the second block in this chart, you can see that there's one coach and two athletes or more athletes, 2+ athletes. That's kind of the absolute minimum acceptable standard, with the idea that we're trying to strive for one of the other tiers along this chart. A big part of this, besides the trained and screened coaches and adults involved in this mix, another big piece of this is the open and observable environments, which you see on the bottom kind of right off your screen there. So that's a really big piece as well. So fortunately, I guess, for the sport of athletics, the vast majority of interaction with athletes happens in a very open and observable environment. In a lot of cases, we're in the middle of a track. We're not in locker rooms typically, or not typically in enclosed spaces. So that's a real positive that our sport has going for us in terms of trying to maintain the rule of two and the open and observable spaces. So a few more notes about the rule of two, just some good implementation practices. As I kind of mentioned before, coach is never alone and out of sight with a participant without another screened coach or screened adult, parent or volunteer present. So that's just, avoiding that first step on the infographic that you saw. And I just talked about the training environment being open to observation. So again, that's in most of our situations in track and field, we're fortunate in that situation that's a pretty easy one to abide by. Ensure a participant rides in a coach's vehicle with another adult present. So this is something that I'm sure many coaches have, a situation many coaches have been in many times and didn't, think twice about it, where you have an athlete that needs to drive home for whatever reason, one reason or another, and they hop in the car and you off they go. And not thinking anything off it. So that's another situation where that would violate, that rule of two, and something that we all need to be more aware of and more cognizant of those situations, because a lot of times they're easy to put ourselves in those and not really think anything of them. The second last piece there, considering the gender of the participants when selecting screen coaches and volunteers who are present. So, again, in an ideal world, then, you are able to provide, same gender screened coaches and volunteers, again, to kind of further enhance the safety factor. And then the last one, which is one that may throw a lot of people for surprise, is that the rule of two applies to electronic means as well, and virtual means. So, that would include texting, one-to-one texting, emails back and forth between, one coach, one athlete. So that's that will be an adjustment for a number of coaches that can use that means of communication to with their athletes in that one-on-one manner. So, how you get around that, there are a number of different ways you can get around that. It could be always copying their parents, always copying other coaches, other club members. Could be the entire coaching staff potentially with your club that you would copy. It could be your entire training group. So if you have 6 athletes, then you make it a rule that any electronic communication just goes out to the entire group, and there's not one-on-one communication. So there's a number of different ways that you can kind of ensure that we're still following the rule of two electronically, but nonetheless, it'll be maybe one of the biggest adjustment pieces for coaches within athletics, because that is a very common practice that would take place within our sport. And lastly, the last pillar of this this policy is the reporting piece. So, and actually one of the more challenging pieces as well. So this is the area where a lot of sports have noted difficulty with, and how to go about the reporting piece in a confidential and safe manner. So the 2 pieces that we have available to us right now, one, the Canadian Sport Helpline, which I had mentioned earlier, that was developed by the federal government. That is 100% up and operational. It's open 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. It's obviously confidential, and a place where anybody can go to address concerns, and talk about what potentially the next steps are. So whether that's harassment, abuse, discrimination, concerns, or reports, it's an info line that can kind of help you with the next steps, and they can definitely help direct you in terms of what needs to be done next. So that's a really valuable resource that's available to all Canadians, all sports, obviously. And then the second piece, when we set up our safe sport policy, we also made an Athletics Nova Scotia helpline. So this is a safe sport helpline if you need assistance, whether it's to voice a concern, ask a question, file a complaint, or whatever the case may be around safe sport. And it's monitored by a volunteer on the Athletics Nova Scotia Board of Directors. It is also confidential and does not involve staff. So I think that's a really important piece as well, that it is a volunteer from the board of directors and does not involve myself or Nitra in any way. So those are kind of the 2 pieces with regards to reporting that we currently have set up. And moving forward, I would see there being even more support on this side of things from a from a broader sport perspective. And of course, we'll kind of evolve our policy as that may arise. So future steps. So I mentioned there's no date, but we do plan on having a Rule of Two webinar, because that is one of the biggest potential differences and things for a lot of our coaches, volunteers, and officials maybe to be aware of. So we will kind of dig a little bit deeper into that at a later date, and we will have somebody facilitate that session who's more of an expert in that field than we are. Also, at some point in time, there will be implementation of coach training requirements as well. So for, again, there's no timeline on that either, but depending on what kind of context, what level that you may be coaching in, there would be a particular training requirement that would be needed in order to be a registered coach with Athletics Nova Scotia. And that would be for the broader membership. I mean, that obviously already takes place for provincial teams and that sort of thing, but that would be for the broader coach membership. There also would be, this is sort of tied to the above point, but the implementation of ethics training. So that's another kind of piece of the responsible coaching movement, which we will also be phasing in at a later date as well. And as I mentioned many times already, just continuing to evolve with national and provincial best practices and requirements that we may need to apply to our safe sport policy. So that's kind of our safe sport policy in a nutshell. It was essentially kind of a walkthrough of our safe sport policy document, which most of you have probably already seen, and if not, it is located on our website as noted. And at that point, I think we can open it up for any questions.
Jonathan, if I could say a couple of things. As a board, we're committed to this safe sport policy. In past, there's been situations in other organizations, in our organization, that have been very difficult for the organizations. So this is a good thing. This is not more work for all of you. It's a good thing, and it protects especially the vulnerable youth. Keep in mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, keep in mind that when we start this up, you will have 6 weeks. And after that, you cannot coach if you don't have it. Jonathan, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so 6 weeks from your registration date as a coach, or in this case, given the COVID situation we're in, 6 weeks from the resumption of sport, which is still to be determined. But then at that point in time, after the 6 weeks, then you would no longer be considered a member in good standing or a coach in good standing. So, if you're continuing to coach at that point, the coach and the club should be, well aware that you're not covered under our insurance policy, and you're not an active Athletics Nova Scotia coach or member of any sort.
And this would apply to the officials as well. And board of directors are also required to take the training and do their background checks as well in that 6 week time period.
Do you guys know if the RCMP is doing vulnerable sector and child abuse registry checks now, like during COVID?
I know they're not. I know because a couple of our members have already got into their local RCMP or police station, and they're not allowed in at the time. So it will be whenever they resume normal operations as well, which I assume would probably be before sport would be allowed back, but right now it's kind of up in the air. So it'll be, if you want to do it right now.
But the 90-minute training is available online now?
Yeah, the 90-minute training is available anytime. But you can also use mybackcheck.com if you are in the HealthX area, instead of going to the police station in downtown.
And a note on the training, so we did indicate it's about 90 minutes, but if you don't have 90 minutes, then you could do 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes. So you don't have to complete the entire 90 minutes all in one sitting.
And a note on the training, as you go through, there's videos to watch, and there's like multiple choice questions, and it quizzes you as you go along. I think there's 6 or 7 modules, perhaps. John probably knows the exact breakdown.
Yeah, I believe it's seven. And the only other note, I guess, on training is that Anitra and I had this difficulty the first time we took it. When you complete the training, make sure that you fully exit out of the training, because if you don't click the exit button and get a confirmation that you exited the training, then it doesn't actually show up on your locker profile. If that is the case, nothing is lost. You just have to log back in and make sure you exit out of it. But that happened to both of us. And I actually feel that it may have been a bit of a bug, because we took it within days of it being launched. So it may actually be fixed right now. But that was a very small issue initially.
You don't have to go back and start at the beginning. It will take you to the very last slide, and then you just click exit again. I think Shannon's got a question.
Actually, I have mybackcheck.com open right now, and it looks like it's a federal website because it does have sponsorships out of Ontario. So
yes, it is a national registry.
Yeah, so it may be suitable for everyone, not just an HRM. And then the Canada Post also can verify identification.
Yes. I'll get more information. I'll double check on my back check to see if it is province wide or if it's limited to Halifax region. And we'll post that information on our Safe Sport webpage.
Yeah. It used to be limited to HRM, but that would be really great if it has been expanded to the entire province, which would make things a little bit easier for some
especially
folks.
right now. I'll check into that tomorrow.
I will check it tomorrow to my back check and see if it works from the Valley.
Okay.
Great.
Yep.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Sherry.
So I missed you all. I got a question about, so it's not uncommon for athletes to text me or then text Quinn or Mira to ask me something, and also to text coaches. We're going to have to come up with a policy of sorts or information to send, email, some kind of way of letting everybody know that we're still available to them, but they need to tag a parent or another person in electronic communication with us. I'd just like to brainstorm some thoughts on or ideas on how we can try to implement this. Obviously, I'll have to let all the coaches know as well, and we all will in our own clubs and through you. But I think that's athletes are going to need to be informed, and because they will still, even after this is in place, 6 weeks after we're back, return to sport, there's still going to be someone that is going to text me or whatever in that situation.
John, do you know what other clubs are using as technology means to, if there's different apps or different programs people are using?
I know a lot of groups would use WhatsApp, but I mean, that doesn't necessarily, or that doesn't solve Sherry's issue. And that's actually something, I think another reason why it's important for us to have a rule of 2 webinar in and of itself, because that's something I didn't think of, to be honest. I was thinking about it the other way around, the coach and, when you're communicating with the athlete, make sure that you're communicating with either the whole group or them or their parent. But I actually didn't think about that situation where the athlete texts you and only you. So, there are a number of pieces, particularly around this electronic communication, that we kind of need to come up with the best practices, the best strategies to kind of to work around them. I think for starters, just a communication with all of the members of the club that, this is a new policy, and how that there can no longer be one-on-one communication with coach and athlete. And I understand that that's not going to stop it from happening immediately, but at least to make everybody aware initially as we kind of develop other ideas and strategies as to how we can deal with all of the specific situations that may arise. Because I'm sure there's all kinds of situations that will come up that none of us are thinking about currently that would potentially violate the rule of two, whether it be electronically or in person for that matter.
Yeah, I've also had male coaches ask me to send messages to female athletes just because the female athlete had asked something of them. So then they went through me. So I guess from this point forward, I'll email a response to the athlete and the parent at the same time, or text a response to the athlete as long as the parent is in there too, or whatever method is used. I'll make sure that the athlete gets the information as well as the parent. And then the second question is there an age that this applies to? Is it U14, or is it above 14, or is it everybody?
This would apply to everybody that we would be dealing with. So you 14, 16, 18, 20, it would be applicable to everybody. And, I guess your first comment or question, the parent is definitely the kind of the gold standard in doing in electronic communication with regards to the rule of two. So if they are always copied, whether if it's an email or whatnot, I think that's kind of the absolute best. And again, I think it's something that we need to come up with all of the possible scenarios that may come up related to that.
Could I?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah.
Hi, Mark Kingley, and I've coached soccer, U15 soccer team last summer, and we used an app called Team Snap, and it allowed you to have every athlete, every parent, if they wanted, sometimes both parents, and it was almost like a message board. When you sent out one correspondence, it went to everybody. If they chose to respond to it or not, it was up to them. Sometimes it would be 2 or 3 people having a conversation. Everybody else could see it, but they didn't have to. So I'm not sure. I know Basketball Nova Scotia has used that as well. So I'm not sure if that's something that would fit in with Athletics Nova Scotia. There is a free version of it. It allowed you to have a certain number of participants, and then there is a paid version which our club could pay for, and you could have unlimited number of teams registered. So again, it could be your different divisions, your throwers, your runners, your jumpers, whatever. So it might be something to look into. And I know there's another free version. I can't remember the name of the app. I'll have to get my phone out and look at it. But we used that Team Snap, and it worked really well. The kids and the parents all really, really liked it. So it might be something to look into.
Yeah, thanks. I think that this conversation, I think maybe would be a good idea for on our Safe Sport page. Maybe we could provide a list of possible ways of communication. So Team Snap, WhatsApp, and any other kind of platform that teams and clubs are using, just to kind of make sure that people are privy to what is available and whatnot. So that's thank you very much for that.
Another aspect of Team Snap, you were able to put in practices, and these athletes could check off if they were available that night or not. So I know, especially with soccer, we're dependent on numbers some nights, and it was real easy. You didn't have to make any communication. You just looked at the app, and it told you that you have 16 players that night or whatever. So again, that's another feature. It was really rich, really feature rich.
Okay. right, we'll check that out. Thank you.
For the age characterization, so to speak, I guess the database of athletes that are minors may have their parents' email part of the database, but when you're taking care of athletes that are above 18, I'm not sure if you would have, so to speak, the reference for being able to talk to somebody else in your communication.
Do we have the information on above 18, Jonathan? I'm just thinking out loud here.
In terms of
Communication with somebody that's over 18. Because their parent may not necessarily be involved. If you're thinking about a university student, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, Nitra, as you were saying that, I think anyone over 18, I think you cover yourself off by copying another coach of the club when you reply. Maybe that's how you solve that, the rule of two, so that you're
not
never
just
alone.
one-on-one conversation. Yeah.
Because we would have the same situation. I think you have to respond back, copy somebody else, and say I'm in compliance with the safe sport, and so I've copied so and so on this, so that they're just lay out the rule of two up front, and then carry on from there. That might be the way of getting around it, and also condition them to stop emailing you and texting one-on-one.
Yeah, and along those lines, another thought that I had was potentially always copying somebody on your club board, for instance, that is the safe sport person on the club board, and there, any communication kind of goes through, is filtered, I guess you could say. Not filtered, but go through their account, their whatnot, so they can kind of oversee what's going on. So there is another record, another set of eyes on all of that communication.
On Claude again, on your set of slides at the end where you file a complaint, so to speak, for the Nova Scotia component, it was not obvious what kind of follow-up would be initiated from the complaint.
So we have two volunteers on the board that are monitoring that email, and then they're directed to reach out to the appropriate party. So if it's a police matter, police. If it's something that staff can assist with anonymously, so keeping out the names, and they come to staff for support, and then we go through our channels, so Sport Nova Scotia, Safe Sport Lead, etc. And if we need to take it up to Athletics Canada, to their commissioner's office, then that's what we would do. We would file a complaint and a formal complaint.
Maybe it's worth us adding a bit of a blurb, basically what you just said, Anitra, and on adding that on to the helpline portion, our helpline portion.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Any other questions?
For officials, the screening are what I understand, the mandatory component, and also the training out of the 90-minute training. Okay.
Yes, the enhanced vulnerable sector check, the child abuse registry check, and the safe sport training of all officials. Yep.
And Athletic Nova Scotia would have some kind of a database compiling the dates associated with each person to make sure that they follow up.
So right now our database will be tracky. So we'll be, there's added right now in the coach section, there's boxes put in dates. They're now working, we've asked them to work on the officials and the associates side of the database. And also Sport Nova Scotia is working on another different database that may be able to house all this information, and then it would automatically send us reminders at the end of your 3-year cycle that your record check is up, and then we send a reminder to you to get it done again. We haven't gotten any more information on that. So right now we're going to be using the Tracky database until something else comes from Sport Nova Scotia. So it'll be Jonathan and myself administering the checks and keeping track of who's done the training. I think Alex is maybe chatting. No, is that Alex? But he's on mute. Jonathan can probably unmute him.
I
If
think
he's
I
there.
can, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go, Alex.
Oh, I can talk now. So traditional phone call is basically sort of out now. Like if some kid calls you, does that constitute one-on-one? Because you sort of, at least I can't copy
Mhm.
like maybe you guys can.
No.
I can't. So if somebody calls you, you have to let all your athletes know that, okay, you don't call anymore. Is that the idea?
Yeah, my understanding is that would be,
Yeah.
one-on-one communication, very direct one-on-one communication, I guess, and
Yeah.
that would definitely violate the rule of two, as far as I am aware.
So another thing, informal ex-athletes, like my coaching a lot of times is sort of a little bit nebulous. It's it's club specific, it's maybe school specific, but then there are other kids that I just that I help out. So if, for example, an ex-athlete calls, who you may be in contact with, do you say, sorry, got to email me?
They've no longer be an athlete of yours?
Not specific. I'm thinking of athletes that I've coached that sometimes ask me for advice.
Yeah, because it's
Ask me for advice. Just in everything, in coaching, in school, and all that stuff. Like they're still in contact. This new one-on-one, is it sort of say, you got to go through emails and copy and all this stuff, or can you have a chat?
Yeah. Like I said, my understanding is that would be one-on-one communication. Now, that's a little bit of a different scenario where this safe sport policy is focused on Athletics Nova Scotia members, and I think what you just described was a conversation with another athlete that may or may not, or probably isn't an Athletics Nova Scotia member, and it's so that, off the top of my head, that seems a little bit more of a gray area in terms of it's because our policy isn't really focused on covering that situation, because
you're very specific now with Athletics Nova Scotia
members.
So, for example, I don't know what the policy is because the schools have shut down. But
right.
For example, does NSSAF have their own set of rules? Like, are they not part of this, or?
This is separate to NSAF. My guess would be that at some point in time that they will be coming out with their own safe sport policy. I would think that in the coming years, there's not going to be any sport organization that doesn't have a pretty similar, if not more stringent, kind of policy than what we initially laid out. Susan, you have your hand up?
That'd be a question we would ask for the safe sport lead at Sport Nova Scotia and the expertise in this rule of two. So that would be our next step, is this rule of two webinar to hash out some of these kind of scenarios and details. I know there's some gray area too around when the position of power changes. So if it goes from, you're in a position of power over an athlete to then becoming a friend with an athlete once they've graduated high school, that changes your relationship. So therefore would change how you communicate.
Right.
But we'll ask that of the experts and let you know.
I just put my hand up because I chatted out a suggestion for Alex's phone call issue, and I wasn't sure if people saw that or not, but
we just saw it. Yeah.
Suggested that you put the phone call on speaker or a three-way call. So you have a parent in the background on the student or the athlete's end. Or potentially you could even, in some scenarios, have two coaches on one end and the athlete on the other end, but as long as there's a third person involved in the phone call, it should work on.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, and those are the types of things that we need to, or everybody needs to figure out through this process, as to how to continue doing more or less exactly what we are doing, just in a slightly different way to make sure that everybody is, kind of following the rule of two, and kind of covering the basis on the safe sport side of things.
I was just going to say too, in terms of the schools, I know from teachers that I've spoken to that, for many, many, many years, that they have been aware of not being alone, say, in a classroom with a student. For everybody's sake, that's just never been considered a wise thing to do. So, or at least having the door open or things like that. So I think there's always been an awareness. This is in the school system, but it will be interesting to see if there's a more formal policy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, even within, within athletics, I think there has always been that informal kind of thought that, to be a little bit aware of what you're doing, but at the same time, you can easily get caught up in a situation where you are in a one-on-one situation and just not think. So, I think for the most part, it's probably, other than the electronic piece, the in-person piece is probably not going to be a huge issue for most situations that our coaches and officials and volunteers and everybody is in. So, or I'm hoping at least that it's not a huge adjustment.
Just a point that this safe sport policy also protects all the coaches. You may find yourself in a situation where an athlete may accuse an adult of something, and if you have backups and things like that, and you were never put on a one-to-one, it protects you.
For sure.
Yeah, the policy is not meant to scare anyone. It's hopefully there to help us and make us feel safer in what we do.
I think it's going to be a bit of a transitional time, because quite often parents are encouraging the athletes to reach out to the coach themselves. And I know that coaches like to hear from the kids as well, rather than having to go through the parents. Sometimes we reach out to parents and the message doesn't get to the kids. And so I think it's just going to be a transition. And also time is going to be needed to not only to inform everyone, but to also enforce it ourselves, enforce it in the sense of, when it happens, stopping it and adding someone else to the conversation, or the media post or whatever. And when that happens, do we report it to this ANS email for transparency, or do we just acknowledge it in the moment and move on, remind everyone that this is the policy now, we all have to abide by it and move forward?
I'd say my first suggestion would be to make sure that you address it in the moment and say, this is something that can't happen in the future. And then if it did happen again, then I would expect you probably to report it so that we're able to get that message across and deal with that member.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because as you noted, I think there will be initially be a number of these situations that will arise until everybody kind of gets on the same page. And, I don't think it's necessary to report, purely one-on-one communication if it happens, once initially. But if it's an ongoing thing where there's no movement towards the rule of two, and then I think that definitely would be a situation where it would be good to kind of cover your basis for sure by reporting that situation.
Mhm.
Can you give us, pardon me, the rule of 2 document that we can send out to, because it's a good visual, I think, for everyone.
Mhm. It's on our website, but we'll send it out again as a PDF to all the clubs and members. You can do that.
Great, thank you.
You know what, I think that this is something that we don't need to be afraid of, because it is something that we've been doing all along for the most part. We've been doing the rule of 2 for as long as I've been involved with Athletics Nova Scotia. It's been something that's been driven home, and just for a safety standpoint, not only for the as a chaperone or an official or as a coach, but also for the protection of the athletes. And I think we need to just bear in mind that this is not something that's, you know, penalizing anybody. And if Alec has a conversation with a former athlete or with an athlete, then he could just remind them that this is what we're looking at going forward. And if you have some issues, then can we address them as a group?
For sure. Yeah, I 100% agree.
There's just a comment here from Clive. He said his wife Laura is currently using mybackcheck.com. It looks like it's available province-wide. The cost is $67.85, tax included. And that is the cost when you do it online. I know it is substantially cheaper when you do it at your local RCMP or police station. So, you know, as we said, there's not a rush to go do it right now. You do have 6 weeks plus how much more time we're kind of in this situation.
Any final questions before we leave it at that?
Hearing none. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight, taking some time out of your schedules. And we will follow up on some of the takeaways that we had here, and we'll get some additional information sent out to the clubs. And we're going to work on the Rule of 2 webinar, and then some more details around some of those specific situations that come up that maybe we don't have the answers for.